Welcome back to Grave Hush, where the frozen wilderness of Alaska holds secrets darker than the endless winter nights. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, trust me. You don't want to miss what we uncover in the shadows of the last frontier. Today, we're diving deep into 4 horror tales from Alaska that will make you question everything you think you know about what lies beneath the surface. Literally, from abandoned mine shafts that echo with impossible sounds to depths that shouldn't exist according to any geological survey, these stories come from the professionals who lived through them and barely made it out to tell the tale. So grab your warmest blanket, turn off the lights, and prepare yourself for encounters that prove some holes in the ground go deeper than hell itself. Let's start our first story. When the instruments start reading depths that geology says are impossible, and you hear machinery running in tunnels that were sealed 50 years ago. Maybe it's time to admit that some mines have a life of their own. My name is Derek Walsh, and I've been a certified mine safety inspector for the Alaska Department of Labor for 18 years. I've crawled through more underground death traps than I care to count, measured gas levels in abandoned shafts, tested structural integrity in caves that hadn't seen daylight since the gold rush, and pulled more than my share of miners out of situations that would make your blood freeze. But nothing in my training prepared me for what I found at the Blackstone copper mine in September of 2019. The mine sits about 60 miles northeast of Fairbanks, carved into a mountainside that locals had been avoiding long before the mining company showed up in the 1970s. The operation had been running steady for 43 years, extracting decent copper yields from tunnels that went down about 800 feet according to every geological survey we had on file. I got the call on a Tuesday morning. Emergency inspection requested by the site foreman, a guy named Martinez who'd been running crews there for over a decade. He wouldn't say much over the phone, just kept repeating that their depth gauges were malfunctioning and they needed official verification before corporate would authorize repairs. Malfunctioning how? I asked. Long pause. Then, they're reading numbers that don't make sense, Walsh. Numbers that can't be right. I drove out there expecting to find faulty equipment, maybe some water damage or electrical issues causing false readings. Standard stuff that happens in old mines. But when I pulled up to the site office that morning, Martinez was waiting for me with the kind of expression you see on men who've stopped sleeping. The gauges are reading 2,400 feet on level 5, he said without preamble. But level 5 only goes down to 780 feet. We surveyed it ourselves when we extended that shaft in 2003. I followed him to the equipment shed where they kept the depth measurement gear. Professional-grade sonic equipment, the kind that bounces sound waves down shafts and calculates distance based on echo return time. This wasn't some cheap hardware store gadget. This was precision instrumentation that mining operations depend on for safety compliance. Martinez powered up the main unit and fed the sensor cable down the level 5 access shaft. The digital display flickered to life, and I watched the numbers climb as the sensor descended. 700 feet, 800, 900. The readout stopped at 2,347 feet. That's impossible, I said, checking the cable length. We only had 850 feet of sensor line, but somehow the gauge was detecting an additional 1,500 feet of open space below where the tunnel was supposed to end. Gets worse, Martinez said. He switched to level 3, a shaft that terminated at 620 feet according to our records. The gauge read 1,190 feet, level 7. Supposed to be our deepest at 910 feet, showed 3,156 feet of depth. Every single tunnel was reading depths that violated basic geology. The mountain itself wasn't tall enough to contain caverns that deep. And our surveys had mapped solid bedrock at the levels where these readings suggested open space. When did this start? I asked. 3 weeks ago. But here's the thing, Walsh. Martinez lowered his voice even though we were alone in the shed. The men have been hearing things, machinery sounds coming from the sealed sections. He led me to a map on the wall showing the mine's layout. Red X marks indicated tunnels that had been permanently sealed due to structural instability. Some as far back as the 1980s. These weren't just blocked off. We're talking about sections that were filled with concrete and marked as permanently inaccessible. Tommy Reeves was doing maintenance on level 4 last Thursday, Martinez continued. Swears he heard a drill running somewhere below him. Not above, not to the side, below. Like someone was operating heavy equipment in the sealed section of level 6. I knew Tommy Reeves, 22 years underground, not the type to imagine things or get spooked by normal mine sounds. If Tommy said he heard drilling, he heard drilling. Show me level 6, I said. We took the elevator down, the cables groaning as we descended past the active levels into the older sections of the mine. Level 6 had been sealed in 1987 after a cave-in killed 2 workers and made the entire tunnel system unstable. The entrance was blocked with a concrete barrier 8 feet thick, reinforced with steel mesh and warning signs. But as we stood there in the elevator shaft, I could hear it. Faint but unmistakable, the rhythmic hammering of pneumatic equipment coming from somewhere behind that concrete wall. The sound wasn't muffled like you'd expect from something blocked by 8 feet of solid barrier. It was clear and immediate, like the machinery was running just a few feet away. You hear that? Martinez asked. I nodded, pressing my ear against the concrete. The vibrations were strong enough to feel through the barrier, steady and purposeful like an active mining operation. But that was impossible. No one had access to those tunnels. And even if they did, there was no power supply to run equipment. Has anyone checked the other sealed sections? Martinez's face went pale. That's why I called you. We checked all 12 sealed tunnels yesterday. Every single one has machinery sounds, but level 9 is the worst. Level 9 had been sealed in 1982, the deepest of the abandoned sections at what should have been 100 feet down. We descended another 200 feet, the elevator shaft extending past the official bottom of the mine into what company records listed as unused space maintained for potential future expansion. The concrete barrier at level 9 was older, thicker, installed when safety standards were even more paranoid about containing unstable sections. But the sounds coming from behind it weren't just machinery, they were voices. Human voices calling out instructions. Coordinating work, having conversations in the casual tone of men doing familiar jobs. I put my ear to the concrete and clearly heard someone say, "Bring that cart over here. We need to clear this section before the next shift." Martinez, I said, stepping back from the barrier. How many men do you have working today? 18, all accounted for on levels 2 through 5. And how many men were working when level 9 was sealed? He checked his clipboard. According to the closure report, the section was evacuated completely before sealing. 0 personnel were inside when the concrete was poured. But someone was in there now. Multiple people working with equipment that shouldn't exist. In tunnels that had been sealed for 37 years. I tried to radio base camp, but our communications equipment was getting nothing but static. Even the emergency frequency was dead. Unusual at this depth, but not unprecedented in mines with high mineral content. We need to check the depth gauges on level 9, I said. Martinez looked like he wanted to refuse, but safety protocol demanded official measurements. He connected the sensor equipment and fed the cable down the access shaft that ran parallel to the sealed tunnel system. The readout climbed past 100 feet, past 1,500, past 2,000. It stopped at 4,217 feet. That reading puts the bottom of this mine below sea level, I said. We're in the mountains, Martinez. There's no way this mountain contains caverns that deep. But the equipment didn't lie, and the sounds coming from behind the concrete barriers weren't imagination. Someone or something was operating a full mining operation in tunnels that officially didn't exist, using equipment that had no power source, worked by people who shouldn't be there. That's when we heard the elevator moving above us. Neither of us had called it. The surface crew had strict orders not to use the elevator while we were conducting safety inspections. But the cables were definitely moving, carrying someone or something down toward level 9. The elevator car appeared in the shaft above us, descended past our position, and continued down into the supposedly non-existent depths below. Through the floor grating, I could see it disappearing into darkness that the depth gauges claimed extended more than 3,000 feet further down. "Walsh!" Martinez grabbed my arm. "The elevator only has cables to 1,200 feet. There's no track below level 9. But we could still hear it descending, the mechanical sounds growing fainter as it traveled deeper into impossible space. Then, silence. We waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but the elevator never returned. "We're leaving now," I said. We climbed the maintenance ladder, bypassing the elevator system entirely, pulling ourselves up level by level using the emergency rungs bolted to the shaft walls. My lungs burned and my arms ached. But I wasn't going to wait around to see what came back up from those depths. At level 5, we stopped to catch our breath, and that's when we heard footsteps in the tunnel behind us. Heavy work boots on stone. Multiple people walking in formation, like a crew heading to their assigned work area. But level 5 was empty, had been empty all day. The footsteps passed directly beneath the maintenance opening where we were resting, and I swear I heard one of them say, "New safety inspectors here today. Corporate's getting nervous about the readings." Martinez and I looked at each other. No one knew I was coming except him and the mine office supervisor, and we were the only 2 people on level 5. We climbed faster. When we finally reached the surface, sunlight had never felt so good. I immediately tried to call my supervisor, but my phone showed no signal. The mine office radio was getting nothing but static. Even the hardwired emergency communication system was dead. "I'm writing this up as an immediate closure order," I told Martinez. "No one goes below level 2 until we figure out what's happening down there." But Martinez was staring at the depth gauge printouts I'd brought up with me. "Walsh, look at the timestamps on these readings." The equipment had automatically recorded the time each measurement was taken. According to the printouts, we'd been underground for 6 hours. But I checked my watch when we entered the elevator. We'd been down there for 90 minutes at most. I drove straight to Fairbanks and filed my report with the State Mining Authority. Immediate safety shutdown, equipment malfunction causing false depth readings. Structural integrity compromised, potential cave-in danger. The official response came back within 48 hours. Inspection report filed. Recommend equipment recalibration. No evidence of safety violations. Mine cleared for continued operation. But I'd never filed an inspection report. I'd filed a closure order. I called my supervisor, a man I'd worked with for 12 years, and he told me the Blackstone mine had been closed since 2016 due to depleted copper reserves. According to state records, there was no active mining operation at that location. "What about Martinez?" I asked. "Martinez who?" We don't have any mining foreman named Martinez in our database. I drove back to the mine site the next day. The access road was blocked by a chain-link fence with signs reading "Private property, no trespassing, dangerous conditions." Through the fence, I could see the mine entrance sealed with concrete barriers, weathered and old, looking like they'd been there for years. But I could still hear it, faint machinery sounds coming from underground. And if I listened carefully, voices echoing up from depths that geology claimed were impossible. The depth gauge readings are still in my truck. 4 pages of printouts showing measurements that violate everything we know about the structure of mountains. But every official database shows the Blackstone mine was closed 3 years before I was supposedly there. I transferred to surface-only inspections after that. No more underground work, no more depth measurements, no more listening to what comes up from holes that go deeper than they should. But sometimes late at night, when I'm reviewing safety reports in my home office, I still hear those voices, calling up from sealed tunnels, from depths that don't exist, asking when the new safety inspector is coming back down to check on their work. Because some mines don't just extract minerals from the earth. Some mines extract something else entirely. And they're still operating, with crews that work shifts that started decades ago and never ended. The equipment doesn't lie. The depths are real. And somewhere far below the mountains of Alaska, in tunnels that official records claim don't exist, the work continues. Let's begin our second story. When the electrical systems in your mind start picking up radio transmissions from frequencies that were abandoned decades ago, and those broadcasts are reporting accidents that haven't happened yet, maybe it's time to admit that some electromagnetic fields remember more than they should. I'm Marcus Rodriguez, and I've been a certified industrial electrician for 24 years. I've worked with high-voltage systems across Alaska's most remote facilities, from oil platforms to research stations where one wrong wire could kill you instantly. But I'd never encountered electromagnetic interference that seemed intelligent until the emergency call from Raven Creek Mine in October of 2020. The site supervisor, Patterson, sounded genuinely disturbed when he contacted my service. "We're getting radio transmissions through our electrical equipment, Rodriguez. Old emergency broadcasts. But they're describing accidents that match our current work schedules." "What kind of transmissions?" I asked, expecting the usual interference from atmospheric conditions or nearby military radar. "Mining accident reports from 1987. But Rodriguez, they're giving details about areas we just started excavating last week." Raven Creek was a mid-sized gold operation 38 miles northeast of Anchorage, pulling decent yields from tunnels that followed natural ore veins deep into the mountain. The electrical system was standard industrial installation, heavy-gauge copper conductors running through steel conduits that powered everything from ventilation fans to excavation equipment. I arrived expecting to find simple radio frequency interference, maybe crossed signals from old emergency broadcasts bouncing off mineral deposits. But Patterson met me at the equipment shed with test recordings that made my skin crawl. "Listen to this," he said, playing back audio captured from their electrical monitoring system. "This came through our power distribution panel at 3:47 a.m. yesterday." The recording was an emergency dispatch, crackling with static but clearly audible. "Raven Creek Mine reporting structural collapse on Level 4, Section C. Multiple workers trapped, requesting immediate rescue response. Time of incident, 0347 hours, October 23, 2020. "That's tomorrow," I said. "Yeah, and we don't even have a Section C on Level 4. We're still excavating Level 3. He played another recording, this one from their ventilation control panel. "This is Raven Creek Emergency Coordinator. We have confirmed fatalities in the new expansion tunnel. gas pocket ignition at coordinates 2047 north, 1156 east, evacuating all underground personnel immediately. I checked their mining maps. Those coordinates marked an excavation site they'd started blasting just 3 days ago. According to their geological surveys, there were no gas pockets detected in that area. Patterson, how many of these broadcasts have you recorded? 17 in the past week. All emergency reports. All describing accidents in areas we're currently working. All dated for times that haven't happened yet. He led me down to the main electrical distribution room. A concrete chamber lined with copper bus bars and switching equipment that controlled power to the entire underground operation. The electromagnetic field readings were off the charts, far higher than normal for standard mining equipment. The interference started when we broke through into the old Mackenzie claim, Patterson explained. That mine was abandoned in 1987 after a series of accidents killed 11 men. We're excavating the boundary area where our claim meets theirs. I connected my spectrum analyzer to the main power feed, monitoring electromagnetic frequencies across the entire radio spectrum. Normal electrical systems generate minimal RF emissions, just standard harmonics from AC power conversion. But Raven Creek's system was broadcasting like a massive radio transmitter, and the signals weren't random static, they were organized, structured, following the patterns of official emergency communications protocols. Emergency broadcast, Raven Creek Mine, October 24, 2020. Reporting equipment malfunction in Section A, Level 3. Electrical fire in main distribution panel, evacuating surface personnel. Electrician Rodriguez trapped in underground facility. Rescue response required. I dropped my test equipment. The broadcast was describing an electrical fire tomorrow, with me specifically mentioned as trapped underground. That's impossible, I said. These have to be old recordings somehow stored in your electrical system. But Patterson was staring at his excavation schedule. We're planning to work Section A, Level 3 tomorrow morning, and you're the only electrician scheduled to be here. I followed the main power cables deeper into the mine, tracking the source of the electromagnetic emissions. My RF detector showed the strongest signals coming from the area where Raven Creek's tunnels intersected the abandoned Mackenzie claim. At the 200-foot level, the interference became overwhelming. Every piece of electrical equipment was picking up broadcasts. Work radios crackling with emergency reports. Equipment control panels displaying scrolling text of accident descriptions. Even the LED work lights flickering in patterns that spelled out disaster coordinates. Patterson, I radioed to the surface. I'm reading electromagnetic field strength that's 20 times higher than safety limits. Whatever's causing this interference, it's centered on the Mackenzie boundary. But my radio crackled back with a different voice, older, speaking with the urgency of someone coordinating a real emergency. Rodriguez, this is Mackenzie Mine Control. We have you on seismic sensors entering the collapse zone. Evacuate immediately. The electromagnetic buildup indicates imminent structural failure. Who is this? I transmitted back. Mackenzie Mine has been monitoring electromagnetic anomalies since 1987. The mineral deposits in this area store and amplify radio frequencies. Every emergency broadcast, every accident report, every death recorded here gets preserved in the copper ore veins like a geological recording system. I checked my equipment readings. The copper ore in the tunnel walls was showing electrical conductivity far beyond normal levels, as if the metal content had been somehow charged or activated. And the electromagnetic field strength was increasing, building toward levels that could interfere with nervous system function. The accidents you're receiving aren't predictions, the voice continued. They're warnings. The electromagnetic field buildup causes structural instabilities, equipment malfunctions, human error, the same pattern that killed 11 men in 1987. Through my headset, I started hearing multiple overlapping broadcasts, emergency reports from different time periods, all describing accidents at this exact location. 1987, 1994, 2003, 2011. Each incident following the same pattern of electromagnetic buildup followed by catastrophic failure. Every mining operation that intersects this area experiences the same phenomenon, the voice explained. The electromagnetic field reaches critical intensity, then discharges through whatever conductive material is available. Electrical systems overload. Metal equipment becomes unpredictably magnetized. Human beings, well, humans contain enough conductive material to complete the circuit. My dosimeter was clicking rapidly, detecting radiation levels that shouldn't exist in a gold mine, and my radio was now picking up what sounded like recorded death screams. Voices calling for help, emergency coordinators reporting casualties, all transmitted through electromagnetic fields that had somehow preserved every tragic moment that ever occurred in these tunnels. "Rodriguez," came Patterson's voice through my radio, but distorted, echoing like he was speaking from a great distance. "Your equipment readings just went dark. We're losing all electrical contact with level 2. I looked at my instruments. Everything was functioning normally from my perspective. But according to Patterson, my equipment had stopped transmitting data to the surface, which meant either my equipment was malfunctioning or I was somehow isolated from normal electromagnetic communication. The field creates temporal displacement," the mysterious voice continued. "Workers experience events in non-linear sequence. Past accidents become present dangers. Future casualties cast warnings backward through time. The electromagnetic field doesn't distinguish between what was, what is, and what will be." I started climbing toward the surface, but my depth gauge showed readings that didn't match my physical movement. According to the instrument, I was descending deeper into the mine even though I was clearly moving upward, and my chronometer was displaying times that jumped forward and backward. 3:47 a.m., 11:23 p.m., 2:15 p.m. Like time itself was becoming unstable. When I finally reached the main electrical room, Patterson was gone. The facility was empty, but all equipment was running normally, power flowing through every circuit, lights illuminating empty tunnels where no one was working. My radio crackled with one final transmission. "Emergency broadcast, Raven Creek Mine, October 22, 2020. Electromagnetic anomaly contained. Mining operations suspended indefinitely. All personnel evacuated safely. Electrician Rodriguez, status unknown." I checked my watch. October 22, 2020, the same day I'd arrived at the mine. I drove straight back to Anchorage and filed a report recommending immediate suspension of operations due to dangerous electromagnetic field levels. But when I called Patterson the next day to follow up, the number was disconnected. The State Mining Authority had no record of Raven Creek Mine requesting electrical inspection services. According to their database, mining operations at that location were suspended in 1987 after the Mackenzie disaster and never resumed. But I still have the electromagnetic field readings. 17 pages of data showing radio frequency emissions that exceed FCC transmission limits by over 3,000%. And occasionally, late at night when atmospheric conditions are right, my home radio picks up emergency broadcasts from Raven Creek Mine. Always the same pattern. Accident reports describing disasters that haven't happened yet, transmitted through electromagnetic fields that preserve every tragedy like a geological memory system, warning future miners about dangers they're about to encounter in frequencies that no living person is supposed to be able to transmit. Because some places in Alaska don't just contain valuable minerals. Some places contain electromagnetic fields that remember every life lost, every accident that could have been prevented, every warning that came too late. And somewhere in the mountains northeast of Anchorage, those fields continue broadcasting, waiting for the next mining operation to break through the boundary and complete the circuit that connects past disasters with future casualties. The electromagnetic readings don't lie, the warnings are real, and the accidents they describe, well, those are still scheduled to happen in frequencies that span decades and carry voices from places where time moves differently than it should. Let's begin our third story. When you pull a 1952 aircraft from the bottom of a frozen lake and find touchscreen displays still glowing in the cockpit, maybe it's time to question whether some crashes happened before the technology that caused them was ever invented. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been a marine recovery specialist in Alaska for 19 years. I've pulled everything from sunken fishing boats to crashed helicopters out of lakes that freeze solid for 8 months a year, worked salvage operations in water so cold it'll kill you in 4 minutes, and recovered aircraft wreckage from depths where the pressure should have crushed them flat. But I'd never salvaged a plane that was more advanced than the year it crashed, until the call came in about Clearwater Lake in November of 2021. The Alaska State Troopers contacted my service about a historical recovery operation, a 1952 de Havilland Beaver that had gone down during a supply run to remote mining camps 69 years ago. The wreckage had been spotted by fishermen using new sonar equipment, sitting intact on the lake bottom at about 90 feet depth. Standard historical salvage, Trooper Matthews explained during our briefing. Family wants closure. Insurance company needs documentation for old claims. Should be straightforward recovery of human remains and any personal effects. Clearwater Lake sits 42 miles northwest of Fairbanks, one of those pristine alpine lakes surrounded by mountains that haven't seen much human activity since the mining boom ended in the 1960s. The water stays near freezing even in summer, which meant excellent preservation conditions for both the aircraft and, unfortunately, many occupants. I arrived at the site with my dive team and hydraulic lifting equipment on a Tuesday morning, expecting to find the typical wreckage pattern of a 69-year-old crash. Broken wings, collapsed fuselage, maybe some scattered debris from impact. But when we got our first sonar images of the aircraft, something was immediately wrong. The plane was sitting upright on the lake bottom, completely intact, like it had been gently lowered into position rather than crashed. No impact damage, no scattered parts. Even the propeller blades were undamaged and positioned at identical angles. That's not how planes look after hitting water, my dive partner Tony said, studying the sonar readouts. This thing looks like it was parked down there. We suited up for the first dive, full cold water gear with heated regulators and emergency surface lines. At 90 feet in water this cold, you've got maybe 20 minutes of useful work time before hypothermia starts affecting your judgment. The descent was routine, clear water with excellent visibility once we got below the thermocline. But as the aircraft came into view, I realized we were dealing with something that didn't match any 1952 de Havilland Beaver I'd ever seen. The exterior looked correct, right color scheme, proper registration numbers, even the wear patterns you'd expect from a plane that had been in service for several years before crashing. But there were details that were completely wrong for 1952 technology. LED navigation lights, not the incandescent bulbs that would have been standard in 1952, but modern LED arrays with distinctive blue-white coloration. And they were still functioning, glowing softly in the lake depths like the aircraft had electrical power. Tony, I signaled through my regulator, pointing at the lights. He swam closer to examine them, then tapped his depth gauge frantically. The LED displays on our modern diving computers were flickering, showing depth readings that jumped between 90 feet and impossible numbers like 347 feet or 12 feet, like something was interfering with their electronic systems. I approached the pilot's door, which should have been a simple mechanical handle and latch system typical of 1950s aircraft design. Instead, I found a touchscreen panel embedded in the door frame, displaying what looked like aircraft systems information in crisp digital graphics. The screen showed engine temperature, fuel levels, navigation coordinates, all updating in real time as if the plane was currently in flight. But we were 90 feet underwater, and this was supposed to be a 1952 aircraft that crashed before digital displays were even imagined. Tony grabbed my arm and pointed toward the cockpit windows. Through the glass, we could see more screens glowing inside the aircraft, multiple displays showing complex technical readouts, navigation maps with GPS coordinates, and what appeared to be radar imagery of the lake surface above us. I tried the door handle below the touchscreen, and it opened easily. No water had entered the cabin, which was impossible after 69 years submerged. The interior should have been completely flooded, filled with silt and debris, home to fish and aquatic vegetation. Instead, the cabin was dry and pressurized, with air that tasted metallic but breathable. The pilot's seat was occupied, but the body wasn't what I expected from a decades-old crash victim. The pilot looked like he died recently, maybe days ago rather than decades. No decomposition, no skeletal remains. Just a man in a 1950s-style flight jacket slumped over a control panel that belonged in a modern jet aircraft. The instrument panel was a seamless glass display, showing moving maps, weather radar, satellite communication status, and dozens of other readouts that wouldn't exist until the 21st century. But the aircraft registration numbers, the serial plate on the doorframe, even the manufacturer's data tag, all confirmed this was the same 1952 de Havilland Beaver that had crashed in December 1952. "This is impossible," I managed to say, though my words were muffled by the regulator. Tony was examining the pilot's body, checking for identification. In the jacket pocket, he found a wallet containing a 1952 driver's license, mining company identification, and what looked like a smartphone. The phone was active, showing the current date and time, November 16th, 2021. The same day we were conducting the salvage operation. But the phone was a model I recognized, an iPhone 13, released just 2 months earlier. The pilot's flight log was open on the seat beside him, handwritten entries in fountain pen ink recording flights from 1950, 1951, 1952, routine supply runs to mining camps and geological survey operations. But the final entry was dated November 16, 2021. Emergency landing due to navigation system failure, GPS coordinates showing impossible location. Instruments indicating I'm underwater, but cabin pressure is normal. Radio contact lost with all facilities, attempting to contact 2021 recovery team. Below that, in different handwriting, someone had written, "Recovery team Morrison, Tony located aircraft, salvage operations proceeding normally. Pilot status, unchanged." I looked at Tony. Neither of us had written anything, but somehow, our names and current activities were recorded in a flight log from 1952. The aircraft's radio was functioning, receiving transmissions from what sounded like modern air traffic control, mixed with communications from 1950s-era mining operations. Voices coordinating flights that were happening simultaneously in different decades, all transmitted through the same frequencies. Clearwater Lake traffic. This is de Havilland Beaver, November 4789, Charlie requesting landing clearance. November 4789, Charlie Losa, this is Clearwater approach. You are cleared for water landing. Be advised, recovery divers are working your crash site. Recovery divers? I haven't crashed yet. November 4789, Charlie. You crashed December 3rd, 1952. Salvage operations are in progress November 16th, 2021. That's impossible. It's currently December 3rd, 1952. Tony and I looked at each other. The radio conversation was happening in real time, but describing events from multiple time periods simultaneously. I checked the aircraft's navigation display, which showed our current position at the bottom of Clearwater Lake, but also showed the plane in flight at 3,500 feet altitude, approaching the lake for landing. Both locations were displayed as current, as if the aircraft existed in two different times and places at once. The cargo area contained mining equipment, but not 1950s mining equipment. Modern geological survey instruments, digital core sampling devices, GPS-enabled mineral detection systems, all manufactured decades after the plane supposedly crashed, and packed among the modern equipment were shipping invoices addressed to mining companies that had been out of business since the 1960s, but dated for delivery in 2021. Tony, I signaled, pointing at our dive computer displays. The elapsed time was showing impossible readings, sometimes moving forward, sometimes backward. Like time itself was unreliable inside the aircraft. We'd been inside the plane for what felt like 10 minutes, but my computer showed we'd been underwater for 47 minutes, well beyond safe dive time limits. Yet I didn't feel cold or suffer any symptoms of nitrogen narcosis that should have developed at this depth and duration. The pilot's body suddenly moved, not reanimation, but like someone waking from sleep. His eyes opened, focused on us, and he reached for the radio microphone. Clearwater approach, this is November 4789, Charlie. I have visual contact with the recovery divers. They appear to be Morrison and Tony, as predicted in the flight manifest. I grabbed Tony's arm and pointed toward the exit. Whatever was happening inside this aircraft, we needed to reach the surface immediately. But as we swam toward the door, the pilot's voice followed us through the water. You can leave the aircraft, but you're still inside the temporal displacement field. The crash happened in 1952, but it's also happening now, and it will continue happening until someone explains how 1950s aircraft acquired 2021 technology. We reached the surface, gasping and pulling ourselves into the recovery boat, but when I checked my dive log, it showed we'd been underwater for 3 minutes, not the 47 minutes displayed on the computer inside the aircraft, not the subjective time that felt like 20 minutes, but 3 minutes. Jake, Tony said, looking at our sonar display. The plane is gone. The lake bottom showed nothing but silt and rock. No aircraft wreckage, no debris field, no indication that anything had ever been down there. I called Trooper Matthews to report our findings, but he said they had no record of requesting a salvage operation at Clearwater Lake. According to state records, no aircraft had crashed at that location in 1952 or any other year. What about the family requesting closure? I asked. What family? We don't have any missing aircraft reports for Clearwater Lake. But I still have the photos from inside the aircraft. Digital images showing 1950s pilot with 2021 technology, navigation displays with current GPS coordinates, and a flight log that documented our salvage operation before we conducted it. 3 weeks later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a 1952 mining company newsletter describing the disappearance of pilot Robert Chen during a supply flight to Clearwater Lake. The article mentioned that Chen had been experimenting with advanced navigation equipment provided by an unnamed technology company. At the bottom of the newsletter, in small print, was a list of company contractors, including Morrison Marine Recovery, who established 2021. I don't do deep water salvage anymore. Lakes, rivers, coastal recovery, but nothing deeper than 30 feet. Because some crashes don't just happen in the past. Some crashes create temporal loops where 1952 pilots fly aircraft equipped with technology that won't be invented for 70 years. And somewhere at the bottom of Clearwater Lake, a de Havilland beaver continues its approach for a landing that happened in 1952, monitored by instruments that display current weather conditions, communicating with air traffic controllers who coordinate flights across multiple decades simultaneously. The photos don't lie. The equipment was real, and the pilot is still flying. Trapped in a crash that connects past and future through technology that exists before it was created. Because some aircraft don't just transport cargo between locations. Some aircraft transport time itself, carrying 1950s pilots into decades they were never meant to see, equipped with instruments that show them exactly when and where they're going to crash. Let's begin our fourth story. When your weather monitoring system starts receiving data from stations that are supposed to be 40 feet underwater, and those readings show atmospheric conditions that could kill everyone within a 100-mile radius, maybe it's time to realize that some storms never actually end. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I've been a National Weather Service meteorologist for 16 years. I've tracked hurricane formations in the Gulf of Alaska, monitored temperature inversions that create deadly ice fog conditions, and issued blizzard warnings that saved thousands of lives across the state. But I'd never received weather data from the bottom of Cook Inlet until March 15, 2022. It started during routine morning data collection at our Anchorage forecast office. I was reviewing overnight atmospheric readings from our network of automated weather stations scattered across southern Alaska, checking wind speeds, barometric pressure, temperature variations. The standard information we use to predict weather patterns 12 to 48 hours in advance. Station AK-247 began transmitting data at 6:23 a.m., which immediately caught my attention because AK-247 had been decommissioned in 1987 after coastal erosion caused the installation site to collapse into Cook Inlet during a spring tide event. The station had been positioned on a small island about 30 miles southwest of Anchorage, recording marine atmospheric conditions until the entire island was washed away during an unusually severe storm. The equipment had been written off as a total loss. The station identifier permanently retired from our monitoring network. But there it was on my computer screen. AK-247 transmitting current weather data with timestamp accuracy to the minute. The readings were unlike anything I'd encountered in my meteorological career. Barometric pressure showed 31.47 inches of mercury, which would indicate atmospheric conditions similar to the eye of a Category 5 hurricane. But surface winds were reporting only 3 mph, dead calm conditions that couldn't exist with that pressure differential. Temperature readings showed 127 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cause heat stroke within minutes, but humidity levels were at 97%, creating a heat index that would be immediately fatal to any human exposed to those conditions. "Tom," I called to my colleague at the next workstation, "are you seeing station AK-247 in the data stream?" Tom checked his monitoring display, then pulled up the station database. AK-247 was retired 35 years ago, equipment lost at sea. That identifier shouldn't be active in our system. But the data kept coming. Wind direction showing 00 degrees, due north, with gusts reaching 340 mph. hurricane-force winds that would level buildings and strip vegetation from the ground. Combined with the temperature and pressure readings, these conditions would create an atmospheric event capable of generating tornadoes with sustained winds over 400 km/h. "Sarah," Tom said, checking weather satellite imagery. "There's no storm system anywhere near those coordinates. Cook Inlet is showing normal marine conditions. Partly cloudy, 34 degrees, winds at 8 mph from the southwest." I pulled up the coordinate data for station AK-247. Latitude 60.8947 north, longitude 151.2156 west. According to our navigation charts, those coordinates place the weather station 43 feet below the surface of Cook Inlet, in water that had covered the area since the island was washed away in 1987. But the atmospheric data continued transmitting. Readings that described weather conditions more extreme than anything recorded in Alaska's meteorological history. At 7:15 a.m., station AK-247 reported a temperature spike to 156 degrees Fahrenheit, barometric pressure dropping to 28.03 inches, and wind speeds exceeding 425 mph. These readings indicated the formation of what meteorologists call a hypercane, a theoretical storm system so powerful it could only form over ocean water heated to temperatures that don't occur naturally on Earth. Tom, these readings describe atmospheric conditions that would sterilize everything within 50 miles. Nothing could survive exposure to temperatures this high combined with winds this powerful. But Cook Inlet showed no signs of extreme weather. Our radar systems detected normal precipitation patterns. Satellite imagery showed typical cloud formation for early spring conditions. And surface weather stations throughout the region were reporting unremarkable marine weather. At 8:30 a.m., more decommissioned stations began transmitting data. Station AK-151s and lost in a coastal landslide in 1993 started reporting atmospheric pressure readings of 32.84 inches of mercury, pressure levels that would indicate the most intense high-pressure system ever recorded. Combined with temperature readings of 87 degrees Fahrenheit, these conditions would create flash freezing events that could kill exposed humans in less than 60 seconds. Station AK-063, destroyed by earthquake damage in 1998, transmitted wind speed data showing sustained 290 mph winds with gusts over 380 mph. Hurricane conditions that would generate storm surge waves capable of traveling hundreds of miles inland. All three stations were transmitting from coordinates that placed them underwater, in locations where their equipment had been destroyed decades ago, reporting atmospheric conditions that couldn't exist simultaneously in the same geographic region. "Sarah," Tom said, voice tight with concern, "if these readings were accurate, we'd be looking at a weather event that would wipe out everything from Anchorage to the Kenai Peninsula. But there's no storm. There's nothing on radar or satellite that matches this data." I started cross-referencing the station coordinates with historical weather records, looking for any correlation between the underwater locations and previous extreme weather events. What I found made my blood run cold. Each decommissioned station had been destroyed during record-breaking storms. AK-247 was lost during the 1987 spring storm that generated the highest sustained winds ever recorded in Cook Inlet. AK-151 was buried by the 1993 coastal storm that produced the most intense pressure gradient Alaska had ever experienced. AK-063 was damaged during the 1998 earthquake-triggered storm system that created the largest temperature differential in state history. The underwater stations weren't just transmitting random extreme weather data, they were broadcasting the exact atmospheric conditions that had destroyed them, decades after the storms had ended. At 9:45 a.m., station AK-081 came online. AK-081 had been positioned on an offshore platform that collapsed during a 2003 ice storm. The equipment sinking to the bottom of Turnagain Arm under 67 feet of water. But now it was transmitting readings that described the formation of an ice storm with freezing rain falling at rates of 3.7 inches per hour. Conditions that would coat everything in a layer of ice thick enough to collapse buildings and snap power lines like wire. "This is impossible," I said, checking the current weather conditions in Turnagain Arm. Clear skies, temperature 38 degrees, no precipitation detected by any monitoring system. But station AK-081 continued transmitting ice storm data, reporting accumulation rates that would create hazardous conditions across the entire Anchorage metropolitan area within hours. That's when I noticed the pattern in the timestamps. All 4 underwater weather stations were transmitting data with future timestamps. Readings dated between 6 and 18 hours ahead of current time. Station AK-247 was reporting conditions for 11:30 p.m. that evening. Station AK-151 showed data for 2:45 a.m. the following morning. The stations weren't just broadcasting the weather conditions that had destroyed them. They were predicting when those same conditions would occur again. "Tom, these stations are showing us future weather events, the exact storms that destroyed them, happening again. Tonight." I immediately contacted the National Weather Service Regional Headquarters, requesting verification of the data and authorization to issue emergency weather warnings based on readings from equipment that officially didn't exist. "Chen," came the response from headquarters. "We show no active weather stations at those coordinates. Your monitoring equipment may be malfunctioning. Recommend immediate calibration check." But our equipment was functioning perfectly, and at 11:27 p.m. that evening, exactly 3 minutes before station AK-247's predicted timestamp, emergency services began receiving reports of extreme wind conditions in Cook Inlet. Sustained winds over 300 mph, temperatures spiking to levels that triggered heat warnings. Barometric pressure dropping so rapidly that people reported ear pain and difficulty breathing. The exact conditions station AK-247 had been predicting from 43 feet underwater. The storm lasted 17 minutes, matching precisely the duration of the 1987 event that had destroyed the original weather station. Then conditions returned to normal, like someone had turned off a switch. Over the next 6 hours, each underwater station's predictions came true. Ice storms, pressure gradients, temperature extremes, all occurring at exactly the times and intensities the submerged equipment had forecasted. By morning, southern Alaska had experienced 4 separate extreme weather events, each lasting just long enough to cause significant damage, each matching the historical storm that had destroyed the weather station that predicted it. I filed a comprehensive report documenting the correlation between the underwater station data and the actual weather events. But when I submitted it to headquarters, the response was immediate and final. Station identifiers AK-247, AK-151, AK-063, and AK-081 have been permanently retired. Equipment was lost due to natural disasters. No data has been received from these stations. Recommend psychological evaluation for staff. Reporting equipment communication from underwater locations. The underwater weather stations continued transmitting for 3 more days, then went silent. But I kept monitoring their frequencies, and occasionally, usually during severe weather warnings, I'll receive brief data bursts from coordinates that place the transmissions at the bottom of various bodies of water throughout Alaska. Always the same pattern, extreme weather predictions from equipment that was destroyed by the very storms it's forecasting. Always accurate to the minute. Always describing conditions that will recreate the disasters that claimed the original weather stations. I transferred to satellite meteorology after that, monitoring weather patterns from space rather than ground-based stations. But sometimes, during particularly severe storm systems, I'll detect atmospheric readings that match the underwater station data. Conditions so extreme they shouldn't be survivable, transmitted from coordinates that show the monitoring equipment is hundreds of feet below the surface. Because some weather stations don't just measure atmospheric conditions. Some weather stations become part of the storms that destroy them, continuing to broadcast warnings from beneath the waves, predicting when the disasters that claim them will strike again. The data doesn't lie, the predictions are accurate, and somewhere at the bottom of Alaska's waters, destroyed weather equipment continues monitoring storms that ended decades ago and forecasting exactly when they'll return to finish what they started.